Start this guy. Ahoy!
Welcome.
That's a really good quality video.
Well, thank you, Steve Jobs and the rest of the crew.
I think I might be getting the iPhone 13 this weekend.
Well, aren't you fancy?
No.
Fancy like Reba McEntire.
Ooh, now that'll be in my head all day.
She sang that song at her son's wedding, I guess, which seems odd.
Like not a good wedding song.
I thought to myself, it's your song. Don't you
Right.
know that this is maybe
Do you know
not
what
the
the
best?
song is about?
Maybe she doesn't have great feelings about her daughter-in-law. I don't really know, but anyhow.
She and Kelly Clarkson had a connection. Now I forget what it was. Like Kelly Clarkson was married
They both
to
sing.
her son-in-law, step-son-in-law, or something.
Interesting.
They're all divorced now, but
Well,
you
of
know,
course.
for a hot minute they were together.
Welcome to 2022.
Yeah. So we've been having some technical
We don't really
issues
know
as
how
well.
to do marriage in 2022, which does affect our parenting.
True.
Because God has a purposeful blueprint for how to build
Purposeful.
for how to build a home. So
Dolphins are parents too.
display-
Dolphin lives matter.
dolphin lives matter.
It's true. Watch your tuna.
But the
You gotta get the dolphin safe tuna.
I get it.
I know what I'm talking about.
I get
I
it.
know tuna.
We just had tuna melts last night.
Oh, I love
and
tuna.
it was delightful.
Tuna's
So does
great. It's an
Emma.
underrated protein.
It is.
Anyway,
My brother-in-law Brad has peanut butter and tuna sandwiches. For his
I
protein.
remember him saying that one time, and I'm not on board with that.
Yeah, I love my brother-in-law. That particular aspect just strikes me as
I make fun of him for
unusual.
drinking black coffee, which is more normal than a tuna and peanut butter sandwich. but
cha. That's what Christians do, apparently.
Yeah.
But
I
anyway.
guess I'll repent on the daily.
So, as we are pressing into actually having the
Legitimate
podcast
conversation.
mostly,
I'm just going to interject because I see we have some people on Facebook. If this is working for you, if you want to give a little hello,
it's just not working for me.
This is working for you guys. It's working for me. Because we've had some technical issues. So if you want to give a little hello,
I think we actually are technical
we
issues.
are.
so.
That was my nickname in high school. If you want to give a little hello, that would be great.
You were starting to say something in our previous attempt at the podcast before everything
About my
shut down on
glasses?
us. Yes, about your glasses.
I got new glasses. I got an additional pair of glasses. I still have my other ones, but I keep losing them, and my son keeps moving them around the house. Which, whatever. He's gonna probably hurt his eyes by wearing my glasses, but he thinks they're funny. So I got these, and I feel like you don't like them.
feel like I don't like them?
So
What?
calling you out live on there.
Why do you think I don't like them?
It is cutting in and out. Cool.
Of course it is.
Thanks. Cool. I don't know what to do about it.
I think Comcast and the Weatherman have to deal with that.
Apologies. Hopefully it gets better because we stopped streaming on the other one. So
So
apologies for
hopefully
the
the
quality.
recording stuff will work even if the live stream does not. So
Right.
we'll go from there.
Apologies. Yes, I feel like you don't like them.
Why do you feel that way?
Because you looked at me funny on Sunday, so you got new glasses. Anyway, maybe I'm a
I don't
little
think it was funny.
self-conscious.
I did look at you and say,
You got
I
new
noticed you got new glasses. I think that was before Sunday, and then I made a comment.
No, because Sunday was the first time I wore them.
So it was Sunday?
Yeah.
Did I see you yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see me with your new
Yes,
glasses?
with my new glasses.
Okay.
Without my new glasses, I couldn't have seen you.
Yeah, no, I did
Simon.
notice that they are different than your other
I
glasses.
went to write a
but-
parody song called Legally Blind instead of Legally Blonde. Anyway, that's my rant.
Yeah, I don't know why you would think I don't like them. I do
you
like
like
their
them?
glasses. They're nice.
Thanks. Okay,
They're-
moving on.
Yes. I think they're a little larger than your other ones.
They are.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if
By choice.
I wasn't sure if they actually were larger or if
They
they
are.
looked larger because of the metal frames.
Well, the frame
instead
is thinner for sure, but no, they are larger.
Interesting.
My next one's to be this big.
Hey, it works. So
Anyway, welcome to something to be optic about.
I did not mean to offend you with
Speaking
with
of
my
my
compliments.
speaking
but-
of my son taking my glasses, let's transition that into parenting, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I thought you were going somewhere with the glasses
No, I
thing
wasn't.
related to this.
I was
not,
just trying to make an awkward moment.
yeah, well,
That's what I'm good at.
okay.
Thankfully,
there
it's
you-
cutting in
there
and
you
out, so
are.
it's even more awkward.
So-
People are getting half the conversation.
So in this half the conversation that you get, hopefully, yeah. Thank you, Mother, for saying that we are odd. I can count on my mom to be honest and tell the truth. And it is shocking because nobody knew we were odd before that.
We've been keeping it a secret so well.
Because this is the home of professional podcasting,
True
after
story.
all. But as we are looking at, because we are on a time-restricted
You're cutting in and
podcast
out.
here.
Apologies for that. We're trying.
Yeah,
Bad connection today.
not going to be able to do much about that on Facebook. If we can get a decent recording and the other, then we'll try to repost it separately. But otherwise, call Comcast and call Channel 16, whether Channel 22, talk to Carrie Peugeot, and we'll go from there. Anyhow, it's funny. I remember when she started over there, and she was like a college kid or barely out of college, and now she's all grown up and stuff. They grow up so fast. As we're talking about parenting, we're actually talking about the role of marriage in parenting.
Maybe that's why I'm stalling.
Probably so, yeah. You didn't bring your Ben and Jerry's with you. I was not calling you out on Sunday.
Gabe even said, he goes, I knew when he brought up the Ben and Jerry's that it had to be you. And I was like, I know.
Yeah, because nobody else. It's not in any way.
Nobody else.
It's not in any way a cliche that the romantically depressed or frustrated female eats Ben and Jerry's. That's not a trope in every romantic comedy or anything else. But
chubby hubby, baby.
I resemble that
Comcast
remark.
and Rain. Yes, you're right.
That would have been my nickname in high school if I had been married.
That would have been weird.
So it actually wouldn't have been, because that's me now. In high school, I was scrawny. So.
Scrawny Tawny. That's less of a good ice cream flavor.
Yeah, and that was never my nickname. So, anyhow, as we're looking at the role of marriage in our parenting, we recognize that God has a plan. Here's a shocker. In case you missed the late breaking news, God has a plan. He has a design for how the home is to be built, and every part of it is purposeful. When God created everything that he put together, the way he designed it, is to a specific end. All of it is to glorify him. It's for our good and our enjoyment. He's given us all things richly to enjoy, but the ultimate goal is his glory, which is why in all of life, the ultimate goal is not our happiness. True happiness, is a byproduct of living out our purpose, which is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So when we get on board with his thing instead of chasing after our thing, then we find a greater level of fulfillment than we were even anticipating in what we were chasing previously.
Right.
So we live in a world where we get marriage wrong constantly. Marriage, sexuality, and family is just absolutely decimated in our society. Not only in our society, but we're living in our society. So we see it most specifically here, but worldwide, this is an issue. And we need to recognize that God's design for marriage is foundational to discipleship-oriented parenting. We cannot get marriage wrong and get parenting right. We cannot get sexuality wrong and get parenting right. So with all of these things, if we are not doing it God's way, then we can't expect the results that God promises or that we ultimately want. And if we recognize, as we've been talking about, that our primary role as parents is discipleship, to raise fully formed lovers of God, then we're going to have to get on board with the fact that the only way for us to do that is God's way to do that.
Right.
So just in recapping, going back through, we looked at Ephesians 5, but building back up for those who maybe have not been following the series and are jumping into this for the first time, we kind of recap the first 6 weeks that our best plans and efforts only matter if God's behind them. Doing it our way is never going to work. Doing it's God, it might work from a worldly perspective, but we miss the boat.
Right.
We everything that matters is gone when we do it our way instead of God's. That's the definition of sin. So, that's why I always come back to Ephesians 3, 5, and 6 as possibly the most central theme of Scripture in all of it, that we are to trust the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. In all our ways, submit to him, and he'll make our path straight. We focus in on God's going to make my path straight.
Right.
And we miss out on the fact that happens when we trust God more than we trust ourselves, more than we trust the world, more than we trust the lies that the devil's planted into our minds. When we stop chasing our way, trying to get fulfillment, to get peace, to get happiness our way, and that now is submitted, it's subjected to God's authoritative rule in our lives, then we find that the happiness, the true joy comes, and it lasts, and it supersedes all of the difficulties and pain. which is why we have so many passages in Scripture, particularly, I mean, throughout the Scripture, but we see it specifically and clearly in the New Testament epistles. It's modeled in Christ, but James, Paul, even Peter continually tell us that there's purpose in our pain. Our suffering is for the purpose of developing us, discipling us to make us who God's calling us to be. In the same way, marriage does that. It's a discipling tool for us personally. It's a discipling tool for our children. It's a discipling tool for those around us, a witness in society. And when we do it right, God is glorified, and we give a clear picture of who he is and how he relates to his people. And if we get it wrong, which is the majority of the time, truthfully, especially today, throughout most of human history, we've gotten it wrong to a greater or lesser extent. Right. Today, there's just an all-out war on marriage. We just deny the validity of the institution. We canonize it in law the idea of a same-sex marriage, which is not marriage. It's contrary to God's definition.
Well, and I think even traditional marriage, I'll use quotes because, hey, is seen...
It's half a quote.
It's half a
quote. Get one side.
I'm cold, so
which I do in text a lot. So
you do half a quote.
I'll start it and then I'll end the text and forget.
It's an open-ended quote. It seems disposable, more disposable than it's ever been in my short life. I'm 34 this weekend.
I think for sure in the church. I don't know, I don't know if it's really changed in the statistics outside of the church.
Maybe not.
In our lifetime. In fact, we're seeing in many cases fewer divorces because people just aren't getting married.
Right. But I think people are like, well, we'll get married because it's just so easy to get a divorce, and then I can get on to the next person and the next person and the next person. And
there was a time in the 90s when the phrase starter marriage became popular.
Right.
So we get in, I don't expect it to last. This is kind of my practice run kind of deal. Now we do that with cohabitation.
Right.
A lot, I've even talked to pastors who are recommending this. It is the worst idea on every level, aside from the fact that it is scripturally unsound and dishonors God and the institution of marriage. From secular research, we see that those who live together outside of marriage are much more prone to get divorced. And they're much less prone to be happy within the marriage. It's an observable reality that we continue to deny because we want to do things our way instead of God's way. Right. And that has an effect on our children in a lot of ways. And so anyway, as we're building up to this and understanding that our job as parenting, the foundation of this is for us to do all that we can to align our parenting with God's plans so that we're discipling our children. So our best plans and efforts only matter if God's behind them. The primary purpose of parenting is to raise fully formed lovers of God. That's the nature of discipleship, to not just get our kids to say, yes, I love Jesus, but to grow up to be fully functioning, whole, confident lovers of God who know God, who understand God on his terms, who come to God on his terms and have their lives subject to him, to his rule, so that they are truly fully formed disciples, truly fully formed lovers of God.
George said.
Yeah.
He was in bed the other night, and it was a sunny day, so it was like 7-ish.
The things George says often entertain me. It
was like 7-ish, but it had been a long day. I'm like, you gotta go to bed, child. And so he was laying in bed, and it wasn't dark. And so I'm downstairs, and I hear him upstairs. He goes, "Hey, Jesus, can you make it dark?" Because he'll tell me, like, he wants it to be morning. And I'm like, well, it's not up to me. It's up to God. And so he was talking to them, like,
Did he invite him to Cracker Barrel? Because
not that time.
That is forever my favorite.
Not that time, but Jesus has a forever, an open invitation to Cracker Barrel with our family.
So
anyway.
Then in the third week, we talked about the idea that discipleship-oriented parenting provides a biblical understanding of God, that it's our job as parents to teach our children about God, to teach them who God is and how God relates to us and God's character and his holiness and why we are to be holy because God is holy. And when we get a biblical understanding of God, this is why historically Christian parents and families leaned into the practice of catechism and the idea of a question and answer format where we are addressing questions of life with very carefully thought out biblical answers to that. That's the purpose of catechism. Refers to the type of training, but it's the idea of raising our children up in the instruction and training of the Lord. And so that's our job. Likewise, along with the teaching part is the example part. We need to teach the mind and touch the heart, recognizing that a parent's most effective discipleship tool is a life worth emulating. They can hear our words, what they see in our lives is what they're going to catch. And if we give them a picture of Jesus in our lives through our own authentic faith, not perfect, not perfect people, but wrestling with the realities of life and connecting that with the reality of God, reflecting the reality of Christ through our relationships, then what we see is our children then say, hey, you know what? There's something real about what mom and dad are doing here, and I want that. So a parent's most effective discipleship tool is a life worth emulating. In addition to the fact that it makes them want to choose it, it also gives them an example of what it actually is so they can follow in our footsteps, which they're going to do anyway. We might as well follow in Christ's footsteps so they're going the right way. So then, we discussed the idea that parents who love their children prioritize discipline as a vital expression of love. If you love your children, you discipline your children, which is not always the corrective, reactive kind of thing, but to train their habits, to train the will. So we teach the mind, touch the heart, train the will, and we want to provide for them these habits proactively, and then also in a reactive correction of things that are wrong. And if we care about our kids, then we will do that, we'll do it consistently. For the purpose not of punishment and retribution, although that may be a part of it, but not for the purpose of our anger or our flesh, but to guide them. So punishment has to do with retribution for the past. Discipline has to do with guidance for the future. And discipline can be a tool within that, punishment can be a tool within that, or it can be a flesh-based anger that is not healthy for us. And then last week, prior to this, the current one that we're talking about today, we saw that discipleship-oriented parenting builds a framework of Christ-like character in developing the habits that go along with this. So we want to train our children with that foundation of character so that as they are learning to live life, the ways of God are not foreign to them. And that's a pretty big deal, which leads right into our modeling of parenting, of marriage. So if God's design for marriage is foundational to discipleship-oriented parenting, then we as parents will approach it by consciously using the tool of our marriage to give a picture of who God is and how he relates to his people. We looked at Ephesians 5, and in Ephesians 5:21, we see this call to all Christians to mutual submission. And it's easy to get angry about that and say, oh, submission is bad. It's easy to write it off as, well, it's just an attitude of deference in general, that it's speaking about humility. And that's not really wrong, it's incomplete. And it seems clear from the context, because right after he says submit to one another in verse 21, that's chapter 4, so never mind. In verse 21, when he says submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, then he goes into several scenarios of what that looks like in submitting to various roles, starting with wives submitting to husbands, then leading to husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. The way Christ loved the church is given to us in Philippians 2 as the picture of the most perfect submission of all. He is equal to God himself. In the Trinity, we see the co-equality of God, and yet humbled himself and submitted himself to the will of the Father within the Godhead, even to the point of death on the cross. And so that the idea here of husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church involves a submission as well. But the submission is primarily to God's will. The role is wives submit to husband, husbands submit to Christ, because there is a picture that God is calling us to carry out. Now, I think it's easy for us to recognize that the less a husband looks like Christ, the harder it's going to be for the wife to submit.
And I was glad you brought that up on Sunday, because this is it's always going to be a difficult passage for, I think, especially men and women to hear. Maybe women more so, because it starts with women saying, submit to your husbands.
Sure.
And it's easy for people to go, aha, or men to go, aha, see, like you said, bring me my dinner, woman.
Men who are not living like Christ.
Right. And it's easy for women to be like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
He's a jerk. But,
and he probably is.
right. But,
and you probably are too, but we forget that part.
Right.
So.
We can edit that in post. But I think it's good to that you brought that in, that no matter what, you need to follow the chain of command here.
Right.
And there's a higher authority that if your husband's not following that higher authority, you still have to follow that higher authority.
Right.
And I, on one hand, I can see there being, from my own personal experience, there was discord in my marriage when we were talking about, I think, this very passage. Because it wasn't being taken, on both accounts, the correct way. And it was a struggle to get it right and to finally realize that.
Let me clarify my comment, by the way, as you're saying that, because I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying that it's always equally both people, because that's not true.
No.
Because sometimes human beings are jerks in our nature.
Word.
So the reality is none of us are without sin. But the thought that every time there's something wrong in a couple, it's both parties, that's just not reality. So I don't mean to say that, and I don't want anybody to hear me saying that as well. So,
Okay,
sorry.
so it wasn't my fault. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not saying that either,
but anyway, it's
not saying, just saying.
It took time for me personally to understand that aspect of it. That, I was so concerned for a long time on making my marriage work that I not forgot, but kind of ignored who I'm supposed to be following here. Like I ignored my chain of command. And I don't have any military experience, but I can understand that.
But you did watch a show with a Mountie in it at one point.
I still do, and I can't wait. Even though I don't like the Mountie anymore. That to me, I think, is an important thing. It's not a caveat, it's in there, but it's an important thing to bring out of that passage, because I think people are so quick to be like, well, I'm not doing that,
It's also our motivating factor for the submission.
Yeah.
So to as he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ in verse 21, that's the governing principle for all of us. So just as we see in Colossians that, whatever you do, work at it with all your might as if serving the Lord and not human masters. Well, that word is for all of us, but he couches it in slave language for a reason. And I think it's significant that after talking about wives and husbands and children, because our children learn this submission and authority through our marriage, right? So if I only submit to my husband when he's super nice to me, or when it feels like he's doing it the way I think he should, then my children learn to only obey when they feel like it.
Or like when things are going well.
Right.
Or,
So when my answer to, well, why should I do that, is because I'm the mom and I said so, or I'm the dad and I said so. Well, that's not invalid. Right. But that has a lot more weight when I've modeled that in my life for my children to see and observe.
So you're doing the opposite, and then you say, do this.
Exactly. That's never going to work.
Right.
So he goes right from the men and women into the children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. And it's a very clear picture. But then, again, the backlash, because as he's talking about the submission in each of these, it's almost like an Old Testament parallelism. And Paul he's a Jewish person. So as he's doing this, it's not surprising that he would use that same method. So the parallelism between the wives submit, husbands in your headship, in your authority, have the attitude of Christ, act like Christ, live like Christ, lay yourself down. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, notice it's again on the husband responsibility, even though some renderings will say parents, and that's not completely invalid, but it seems that the context here is very much for the father specifically, even though it definitely applies to both. But he says, fathers, then don't exasperate your children. Mm-hmm. In other words, don't parent them from your flesh, parent them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord in the King James, or training and instruction of the Lord in the NIV. So there's a submission, and then how should those in authority handle that authority? Right. And then he goes directly into the slave picture. Slaves, obey, this is verse chapter 6, verse 5. So it's outside of the text that we were focusing on, but it's the very next thing. So it's still in the same context. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. So that's the picture that children and wives are to also draw from. That it's not just when you want to, not just when it looks good, not just when it should be, but submit because you're submitting to Christ. And when you are unjustly treated and you submit, Peter says this in his letters, when you unjustly are unjustly treated and you submit, there's a witness in that that is bigger and better and deeper and beyond human understanding. It's easy for us to understand submission when you tell me to do what I already think is right.
Right, or what I already want to do.
Right.
You know?
When you tell me something that's hard, that's when we run into a real struggle. And so that picture is huge. But he has that same kind of a couplet or parallelism in going in verse 9. And masters, or verse 10, no, whatever it is. It's 9.
It's one of them.
I should put my glasses on. Masters. Nice. No, I don't like those. Just kidding. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no favoritism with him. You don't get the benefit of the doubt because you are in authority. On the contrary, as James says, those who are in authority, teachers in James chapter 3, you're held to a higher standard, to a higher accountability, and you need to recognize that. And so that is a really big deal to recognize the importance that both the submissive or the one who is to submit and the one who holds the authority both answer to Christ for how they do it. Right. You as the authority, you don't answer to Christ for whether or not the person submits. Right. You answer to Christ for how you handle your job. Mm-hmm. Same thing for wives and husbands. And that is a picture that we give to our children. And if we don't get that right, then we make it much harder for them to understand a right relationship with God. They don't understand his character the same way. It makes it much more difficult for them to enter into that relationship and to live obediently to him. So we'll talk in a couple weeks about the struggle because we don't live in a world where we're all doing that, right? And so now what? I've blown it. I'm divorced or whatever my situation is. My husband's abusive. My wife's not submissive. Now what? How do I handle that? So we'll talk about that later.
I won't be here that week.
Well,
you're gonna have to talk by yourself.
We'll make it work.
We'll make it work.
We'll do a live stream from Disney.
Yeah,
about that.
Podcast from the Magic Kingdom. Probably have better connection there.
Maybe I'll just come down and we can do it from there.
Cool.
That'll happen.
We'll just call up Walt and see if that works.
That's just as likely as
cryogenically frozen. So yeah, that's all we have for today. I apologize if you were on Facebook and watching this and it kept cutting in and out. Yeah, again, blame Comcast. And yeah, like Fran said, Comcast and Rain is probably the culprit here.
Right.
But we will hopefully post you're going to do a hard copy video, upload it.
We'll do something.
We'll do something so you can see it.
It'll work.
And you can always listen via iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. That should be up here in a couple minutes after we're done. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at somethingreal@reallifonline.org, or you can leave us a message on Facebook or YouTube, or you can leave us a voicemail using the Anchor app or calling the church at 269-756-RLCC.
You got really good at that.
Well, we've been doing this for 5 years now, which I hope I'm okay. So thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you next time.